When a building collapses, the victims tend to remain trapped between the pancaking floors. They may be crushed and mangled, but in most cases they remain in one piece. In fact, on the morning of September 11, local hospitals prepared to receive hundreds of victims they expected to be extracted from the rubble. Practically no one arrived. According to the chief medical examiner, 2,749 victims died in the Twin Towers, but fewer than 300 whole bodies were recovered. Nearly 20,000 pieces of bodies were found in the ruins, more than 6,000 small enough to fit in 5-inch test tubes. 200 different pieces were matched to a single person. 1,630 victims were eventually identified, 800 of which by DNA alone. This means that for 800 victims, there were no body parts large enough to be recognizable. The remaining 1,119 victims were never identified. This means that for more than 40% of the victims, not even a fragment large enough to recover DNA was found.
For Joyce and Russell Mercer, there's no trace of the son they lost on 9/11, firefighter Scott Kopitko.
You can't go to a cemetery, can't put flowers down.
Personally, I lost a cousin in the building and never found his remains. He was on the 100th floor of Tower 1 and they never found his anything or any remnants.
Patricia Riley recovered her sister Lorraine's handbag, but nothing of her body.
Lorraine has a tombstone at the cemetery, but she isn't there.
1,100 victims completely unaccounted for. In other words, no pieces large enough to gain any DNA from, vaporized. Can fire and a gravitational collapse account for this massive pulverization of people?
This map by the New York Fire Department shows the locations around the towers where human remains were found. Yellow circles are body parts from civilians. Red triangles are from firefighters. The very distance at which some of the body parts were found remains inexplicable with a simple gravitational collapse. In fact, fragments of human remains continued to emerge from Ground Zero for many years after the attacks.
Human remains were found at the World Trade Center site on Wednesday. Crews made the discovery at 11 Water Street. Another 4 possible remains were found at the Whole Road excavation site.
The ME is also investigating other remains that were found about 2 weeks ago on the roof of 90 West Street.
Construction workers found 9 pieces of bone and tissue on a 20th floor scaffolding on this building on West Street.
Workers have found 65 potential human remains at the World Trade Center site over the last couple of days. The medical examiner's office says they were recovered from the Liberty Street section of the site.
Then, in 2006, came the biggest surprise.
Demolition workers found 74 new bone fragments on the roof of the Deutsche Bank building over the weekend. That's the most found since the end of major recovery operations at the site.
The number of fragments found on the roof of the Deutsche Bank kept increasing by the day.
Crews continue to find human bone fragments on the roof of the Deutsche Bank building next to the Trade Center site. The medical examiner's office says 142 fragments were found, bringing to 598 the total number of fragments found in the building.
Eventually, more than 700 bone fragments were recovered from the Deutsche Bank building. USA Today wrote, "The bone fragments are tiny, some the size of a pinky nail." Some debunkers have suggested that the bone fragments could have reached the roof of the Deutsche Bank after the impact of American 11, as some debris exited the opposite side of the tower in a southerly direction. But the view of the Deutsche Bank was blocked by the South Tower at the time of impact, and there was no direct line between the exit hole in the North Tower and the roof of the Deutsche Bank. Furthermore, as seen in this map, the body parts found on the roof belong not only to civilians, but also to firefighters, who were clearly not present in the North Tower at the time of impact. Question: can you explain how a simple gravitational collapse, where the bodies remain trapped between pancaking floors, could have produced more than 20,000 body parts out of 2,700 victims, while more than 1,100 bodies left no fragments large enough to extract a DNA sample? Can you explain how a simple gravitational collapse could have produced the bone fragments and body parts from civilians and firefighters that were recovered from the roof of the Deutsche Bank building?